The name's Lee-Man, kind Lee-Man, and I was the apprentice to the greatest king of all time, Crunturg, the forgotten Minotaur king.
The towering and mighty frame of the Minotaur that had confronted us paralyzed Tristophe, Ahani, and myself. The keeper of the public house we stood motionless in also remained silent. With a few more thunderous steps, the enormous brown and white spotted bovine man closed the distance between us.
Now, why are you walking around this town with my old friend's name in your mouth, kid?
Stutteringly, I told him everything I could. I hailed from the kingdom of Wolfkeep, and was a student soon to graduate from the Sigwardi's University. While in class, I heard the story of a Minotaur that slew the Mindas family. At the mention of the Mindases, a not-so-hidden grin crossed the Minotaur's face. I continued that the vagaries confounded me around this passage. I went on to tell him of the prince and his Regelisod fiancé trying to stop me, as well as the Rospo thugs that had given me even more hints to Crunturg's story. Now, a look of stern annoyance veiled his face at the mention of the Regelisod princess Wallabunga and the Rospos. I completed my tale by saying the imminent destruction of the Mindas castle is what hurried me faster to the town, only to see the destruction crew heading there moments ago. The burly Minotaur grabbed a nearby wooden chair, spun it around in front of him with his three-finger-hooved hand, and slumped into it with a grimace of contemplation. The keeper of the public house gave us a nervous nod, then swiftly headed to the back of the room, leaving us alone with the Minotaur.
I didn't think anybody in the world cared. You may not understand, but what you said means the world to me.
He pulled what looked like a well-worn handkerchief from the breast pocket of his dark canvas vest and dabbed at the corner of his large brown eyes.
You see, the name's Lee-Man, kind Lee-Man, and I was the apprentice to the greatest king of all time, Crunturg.
Kind, the Minotaur, took us to his room in the public house, a dusty single cot setup with a few sling chairs and a table. He then began to tell us more information than we could possibly have imagined. Crunturg was brought to Goldenarod as a slave, kept in the lowest dungeons of the Mindas Keep, and chained to a wall. His life before that was even a mystery to Kind, beyond the fact he had no family and was abducted while roaming the deserts for his people. Birk Mindas, king at the time, had a strong fascination with the Minotaur race. He would capture them and have them fight for his amusement directly in his great hall. One of these many Minotaurs was Kind's own father, Fam. It was only the first day of his capture when Crunturg escaped, using an enormous crag hammer he discovered near the forges he was kept, overpowering the kingdom's farrier, the blacksmith and medical care provider that affixes metal plating to livestock hooves. The farrier's name was Yor, and he was a particular breed of centaur, with white and black stripes covering its body from head to hooves, sparing Yor's life in exchange for guidance to the Grand Hall of the King. Exiting the keep, Crunturg had made his way through the maze-like structure of the castle, slaying any guards he had crossed with swift strikes from the craghammer, or in more desperate encounters, goring them on his very own horns. During his breakout, several particularly peculiar events occurred. The first of which happened when a wrong turn or three resulted in Crunturg finding himself in the castle's ossuary, a crypt decorated with bones. Except all of the bones in this tomb were made of solid gold. This is when I finally remembered why the Mindas family had risen to power in the first place. Their gift of Chrysiopia, the power to turn any object to solid gold, would have been absurdly useful when founding a kingdom. However, the lavishly dulcet decorations weren't the only thing to capture the lost Minotaur's attention. The royal family must have went to great lengths not only to aggrandize their dead, but to defend them as well. A specter wreathed in golden-spun linen bandages, visually identical to an otherwise traditional mummy grave robber stories were commonly filled with. Later speculation had most believed this was the spirit of Björk Mindas's father, the former king. Crunturg was unable to harm the spirit. However, it could still manifest dark energy to use against the Minotaur. It wasn't until Crunturg managed to not only pulverize the caskets of the ossuary, but also the majority of the corpses therein, did the spirit finally dissipate due to weakness. At this point, Kind got up from the bed he had been sitting on and issued us out of the public house. Honey was rushing through notepads and books with a speed I hadn't thought possible. We stored the ones she completed in our public housing room before leaving. We followed him in awed silence, even Tristophe, who had little investment in his story, but still found it fascinating. We walked our group through the town. This was when I noticed many passerbys wave and give kind, heartfelt smiles, while others shrunk into their houses as they saw him approach. We walked to the edge of town, opposite the crossroads, and into the tall yellow flowers surrounding the kingdom. We were coming upon a cavernous entrance when Kind suddenly stopped and continued his story of Crunturg. The second out-of-the-ordinary occurrence as the Minotaur continued his flight through the castle was the chance encounter he had with another person, also fleeing guards, while exiting the royal treasury. The human man Crunturg had only known as Thief, likely feeling it was in his best interest to aid any potential allies during his escape and potential confrontation with the king. Crunturg stopped the thief, and together they slew the pursuing knights. After the man introduced himself without giving a proper name, Crunturg convinced the man to help him get revenge. This thief likely had no interest in regicide, but given the bloody and imposing bullman before him, he agreed to help. The two of them finally found their way to the grand hall's entrance through an ornate courtyard, only to be once again accosted by knights. This time, Thief took the lead, stealthily and impressively, according to Kind, taking down one of the fully armored men in a single-handed thrust. However, before Crunturg could give a jovial mid-battle congratulations, Thief was beheaded by the second guard. Crunturg finished off the attackers and went on to tend to Thief's body, deciding to carry it with him to the end of his self-imposed mission. " 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « 」 « Upon entering the Grand Hall, Crunturg bore witness to the very event he was abducted for. 2 bestial minotaurs stood before the king's throne, one spotted white and brown, just as the man before me telling this tale, and the other dark as pitch, with blood-red spiral tattoos adorning his body, and brass rings in his nose, as well as ears and his curved inward horns. Crunturg stood at the far end of the hall, behind a buttress and out of the eyeline of the king. A large number of guards lined the sides of the minotaurs at the center of the room, and a rack of weapons was located directly behind them. The brown and white minotaur pleaded to the king to not force him to fight. Mockingly, the king issued a vague threat to the minotaur's family, who were also captured. Laughing sinisterly, King Byrk Mindas leaned over to tell his young twin daughters, who sat disinterestedly next to him, this was why Fam Leman was his favorite fighter. A crier from the side of the king's throne shouted that this bout between Fam Leman and the Man Reaper was about to commence. This was when Kind clarified that Fam was indeed his father. With his family in danger, Fam took up a sword from the rack, and the Man Reaper Minotaur took up a heavy scythe. The two battled bloodily for several minutes while Crunturg studied their moves from behind a pillar, even closer to the king. Finally, when pinned by the Man Reaper and seemingly seconds from death, Fam let out a blood-curdling cry of
"For my family!"
and stabbed the Man Reaper near fatally. The crier issued, the battle ended, and Fam Leman the winner. Standing up and clapping, Mindas began walking to the center of the fight. Crunturg readied to reveal himself when the king sharply gestured a finger at the bleeding Man Reaper. While the dark bull was groaning in pain from the stab wound, he jolted to his hooves and began to shriek in unimaginable agony as his entire body began turning into solid, unmoving gold. This stopped Crunturg in his tracks, and as the king began slapping a terrified Fam on his back in congratulations, the bookending guards spotted Crunturg leaning from behind his hiding spot. Finding himself surrounded and in unwinnable odds, Crunturg made a very wise decision. He tossed the headless body of Thief to the ground before the mildly confused king. He then told Mindas and the guards he was a new fighter, and he discovered this assassin making his way through the castle, killing guards and raiding the treasury, as well as destroying the family tomb of the Mindases. Byrk had a look of minor concern, but followed it with a thankful head nod to Crunturg, before pointing once again, this time at the headless thief, and making another horrific golden statue. He told the guards to return Fam to his pin, and to have Crunturg taken back to the farrier for battle prep, for tomorrow he would be facing Fam on the field. Utterly riveted, I begged Kind to go on with the story. I was more convinced than ever that despite all of my setbacks and hardships on the journey so far, what I was learning was so incredible. The history book I would develop would be unbelievably well received by the academic community. However, Kind put up his hoof-like hand again to me and gestured at the cave he had brought us to.
Okay, little fella. I haven't even told you a fifth of the Crunturg stories I got. But you know as well as I that castle ain't gonna be there forever. Not with those bastard Regelisad on the way.
This statement brought me back to reality, and my current predicament rather harshly.
Now, I got a plan to deal with those ogres, this prince, and those fell felines once and for all. But I need to know that I can trust you. Understand?
I gave him a vigorous nod as he began to walk into the caves. I started to follow behind him when I felt a familiar paw on my shoulder. Myrink. She tilted her head to the cave with a nervous look and eyed me as she thumbed the button on her gun holster in defense.
Tell that little mouse pal of yours I'm a man of my word. I want to save that castle and my hometown more than anything.
Even though he was at least 10 paces ahead, and with his back to us, he knew what was going on. Myrink must have had a bad feeling. But Kind's words must have reassured her, as she reclipped the holster and followed him into the caves. Inside the cave, the walls looked like smooth sheetrock and were lined with mounted torches. The ground sloped gently downwards, and the path seemed well treaded, but went on for a while before we found ourselves in front of a seemingly out-of-place metallic door. The surface was lined with occult symbols and images, languages even I couldn't decipher despite my minor studies. Kind put his hand on the door, then turned his head to our party with a look more serious than we had seen on him before.
When you're going up against forces as evil as those Regelisad, sometimes you gotta go someplace even darker to deal with them.
Still, not having gotten to the part of Crunturg's story where the Regelisad even entered, I was slightly confused by his intensity. With great effort, he shoved the door inwards, and beyond we only saw pure darkness. Kind then turned around and grabbed a torch from the wall. He then tossed it full force into the room, and for the briefest of seconds, we saw the light of the flame pass over what looked like hundreds of standing and swaying skeletons of various height, shape, and race, who then all turned to face us in unison. Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. Or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.